uh, to do this. And I know folks who are listening online right now, I guess there's a sound issue, and so y'all are just going to hear my plain microphone now. We'll fix that in between the breaks. So sorry about that for the folks who are listening online. We're talking about the Jones Act today, and so again, continue on the Jones Act side. So like this is something that because people recognize how harmful it is, every time a natural disaster happens, like when Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico, it's it ended up getting temporarily waived so that foreign made and foreign flagged ships could deliver goods from, say, Florida or Texas or wherever it is to to Puerto Rico where they needed it. Again, you could get direct foreign ships going in there, but right now the problem is not being able to do that regularly. There's nothing to this other than like an artificial barrier to protect an industry that is well connected, hurting real people, hurting the ability for the people of Puerto Rico to build resilient infrastructure in the first place, hurting their ability to be able to recover from disasters. Right now, like the specific situation that's happening in Puerto Rico right now in the aftermath of Hurricane Fiona is that there's a foreign flagship that was taking goods, I think from, I want to say it's from Texas to Puerto Rico that had a whole bunch of diesel generators on it and fuel, and they could just do it. They could get this to the island. They need that to be able to, know, uh, recover, to be able to rebuild, to be able to have, electricity, to be able to do all the things you need to do electricity for. And and again, what is preventing them is this protectionist law. It'll probably get waived again, probably. Or this ship will decide that the most just thing to do is to disobey the law and to just deliver the fuel. And if they get sued, then that is what it is. But like this is one of the situations where it's tough. Again, they were expecting probably that there would be a quick waiver and they would just be allowed to go through, and that's what was going to happen. And it hasn't. It's taken a bit longer than folks expected. I say this every hurricane season. It's always a thing every single year, though. Like, why do we still have this? Why in every disaster do we need to waive this? Why do we need to let goods and services be more expensive in a place like Puerto Rico because of this law, and in a place like Hawaii, or even here in the continental U.S. too, in the lower 48, right? Sometimes it might be more efficient to deliver goods by ship from, say, New York down to Miami than it would to use trains or trucks. Sometimes that might be better. It might make more sense, and it would be cheaper if we just were able to use other ships to do it. It gives you more options to be able to do that. We don't have that. There's so many laws out there that, like, again, it's wild how many folks recognize how destructive something like this could be. Generally, not just in these specific situations, but generally, and then still refuse to do a single thing about it. That's the one things that bums me out. Again, I talked about on Monday, like this small reform to the environmental review process that we could do, that we could use to make things just a tiny bit better. We could do the same thing with the Jones Act. A bunch of people recognize, hey, this creates some problems, and we come to this every single year, every fall, every time a hurricane hits Puerto Rico. It's a discussion we end up having. Hey, here's how the Jones Act is making this situation worse for these people who are suffering from the damage of a hurricane. Here's what we can do to fix it. Does it get done? Nope. Nope. Doesn't happen. Why? Why? Again, like for I know it's one of these niche things, right? Like most people don't know this is a thing. Most people don't recognize this as a problem. But if we're gonna have people in the Senate and people in the House, and the whole idea of a constitutional republic is that these folks are supposed to know and understand how the laws work in a way that's more complex than average people get, and is something that's really big for for like average folks to like pay attention to. It's like it's a specific thing that impacts specific people at specific times. The whole point of our congressional system is that these folks that we elect to understand this stuff and are supposed to make laws that are better serving the American people should be able to address it. And we got a Facebook user saying, an idea makes sense and it's easy. They will make a regulation and laws to screw it up and make it hard. Man, it feels that way. Like that's how it feels a lot of times. It's just, we could do things better. You know, I'm usually not cynical, but I was like, okay, is it just that, like, the lobbying from, like, the shipping industry folks that are keeping this in place? Is there some constituency somewhere? Is it that just most people don't care enough? Is it that there's not enough political power within Puerto Rico to care for this thing? Like, what's the barrier to this? Shouldn't our members of Congress do the right thing, even if there's no money in it, no constituency in it? It's just the right thing to do. I don't know. Sounds idealistic, right? All right, thanks again for joining us here on A Free Solution. Give us a call if you want to participate in the show, 585-346-3000. That's 585-346-3000. We'll be back in just a few minutes. Talk to you soon. Yeah, it's normal for you. For whatever reason, my digital audio cable is not pulling in the program feed. I don't know why. And so I just have my mic on. Yeah, nothing you got to worry. That's my problem. All right, welcome back to A Free Solution. I'm Kevin Wilson, your host for today. Thanks again for joining us here on this wonderful Wednesday afternoon. You can give us a call if you want to participate in the show. We're live here on WIS Helpful 2, 585-346-3000. That's 585-346-3000. Or leave your comments online on the Free Solution Facebook page, Free Solution YouTube channel, Free Solution group, or the Kevin Wilson pages, wherever you're listening today. Again, I appreciate y'all being here. And another comment from Facebook user has been paying attention for 44 years. The situation is normal. This is how it's done. It makes no sense, but it is how it is, and it will be changing without. And it will be without change. Hashtag write-in candidates only. Hashtag write-in Larry Sharpe. Yeah, no, that's 100% part of the solution, right? It's like let's write in some candidates if we need to. Again, there's unfortunately New York State made it very difficult for true independent candidates to get on the ballot this year. So the Libertarians, the Greens, and any other third party who had their ballot access wiped out after Andrew Cuomo ended up changing the laws under the weird guise again of the of like financial support for political candidates, right? They're going to give money to campaigns, but you had to. The justification was basically that they wanted to make sure it wasn't going to fringe candidates, so they raised the threshold of getting on the ballot, even though it doesn't even matter. Like how you get money there's still a barrier to entry of you have to raise a certain amount to get the match from New York State. So it wouldn't have even been an actual barrier to third-party candidates getting on. This ends up just being a massive subsidy for Republicans and Democrats at the same time as removing their competition. It's in the state that has massive amounts of like brazen corruption. My goodness, that's one of the most outlandish acts of corruption that New York State has seen in a while. It's pretty bad. Again, it just a straight up giveaway. Take your money, give it to Republicans, Democrats. Doesn't matter if you don't like them, and kick out any competition. That's what happened with this. And unfortunately, to that end, like just a new poll came out, which does not include those write-in candidates, folks like Larry Sharpe or any other independent candidate. Governor Hochul right now leading in the polls 54% to Republican Lee Zeldin 37%. The Senate race, Chuck Schumer 55%, the Republican candidate 36%. Again, not including Larry Sharpe in the governor race, not including people like Tom Queter in the U.S. Senate race, who I'll end up writing in. And yeah, it looks like it's going to be another year of that, right? And I know folks who are like, hey, maybe this is the year. Maybe this is finally the time that the Republicans take over. It's probably not. I mean, maybe, but probably not. People said that back in 2018 too. And I had a lot of folks who were like, oh, well, I would vote for Larry Sharpe, and I know that like even if he doesn't win, like getting a big percentage of the vote is going to make a difference, because that sends a signal to Democrats and Republicans to maybe co-opt some of those issues, or at least pay attention to a movement of people who are sick of the status quo. And people would know this. People would understand it, as that they know how like even not winning, having a significant turnout for an independent candidate, especially one who reflects, at least my values, like Larry, and oftentimes these folks' values, how that can make a huge difference. Because again, it's not just winning. If you can get a big enough percentage of the vote to scare, to duopoly, they're going to have to start to change their behavior or threaten to lose their power. And that's how we in the libertarian movement can make gains. It's not just winning elections. It's leveraging first past the post systems to have them co-opt the most salient issues of our party. And again, if the salient issues are the economy and the reforms that we want to make there, great. That's part of it. If it's just more freedom, more liberty generally, bodily autonomy, if it's the Second Amendment rights, whatever it is, you get a big enough percentage of the vote, even if you don't win, it starts to make a huge impact. And so unfortunately, again, last time around, and it's probably going to happen this time too, a bunch of folks will recognize that. But I'd love to hear from you guys listening today, 585-346-3000. But a bunch of folks, will know that, and you'll say, well, but what if this time, because I don't vote for the Republican, the Democrat, if I don't vote for the Republican, what if this is their year to do that? It's probably not. Yeah, we look at the polls, we see what's happening. It's probably not going to be the case. Not in New York State. We can hash it out with them like local elections, but and in this case, yeah, I mean, I'm pretty confident in that. I want to support Larry Sharpe in this election for that reason, right? Not just because he's also part of a free solution, but just because that's where my values lie, and that's the right thing to do. And I see it, unfortunately, where the polls go, right? And I know some folks are going to say, "Oh my goodness, they overweight Democrats in these polls. They poll too many of them. This is a biased poll." It's Siena poll. I'm talking about the one that came out. The thing is, sometimes, yeah, but also there's more Democrats in New York State, and people tend to vote along party lines. Sorry, everyone does it. Everyone they want to vote for their tribe. They want to signal that they're part of that team. That's how they do it. So they weight appropriately for Democrats versus Republicans versus independents. Ask them what they're thinking, and that's how you get the breakdown of these poll numbers. It's not always great. There's plenty of things to criticize about these polls, especially the exclusion of independent candidates, which Now they could say, well, they're not actually on the ballot. They're, the write-in candidates. We don't know if we should include them. Write-in candidates win. Lisa Murkowski won her race. Is it these things happen? Um, she won her race on a write-in campaign a few years back, and but either way, like even last time around, they would often exclude the third-party candidates, and you'd never get a shot. And that sort of thing that sets the narrative ends up making it difficult for independent voices to get ahead in this, and then it becomes just merely a horse race between the Republicans and Democrat, candidates at every level of this, at the governor level, at the Senate level, at you know attorney general level, all those things, right? It's that's the narrative that gets set. That's the discussion that ends up happening in on most mainstream media, outlets, right? It's the horse race between those two. You got to make a choice. You got to pick between those two. No, I don't. You don't have to do that. You don't want to do that. They don't represent their. If they represent your values, go for it, man. Do your thing, right? Like I'm not. I might try to convince you otherwise, but like I get that. I gotta respect that. If you're a person who agrees 99% with the Republican or Democrat, yeah, they're the ones for you. Okay, I'm gonna still try to convince you on the policy issues. But if you're like I agree 95% with the Libertarian and only 60% with the Republican, okay, you should probably vote Libertarian then. That's what you should do. Go with where your values are, because if you don't signal to those folks, Republicans and Democrats, like where you want them to go, you can write letters, you can tweet at them, you could do your thing. If you don't find some way to signal that you're not going to follow them no matter what, it's not going to be any incentive to change. That's their currency. That's how they like make decisions in part about like where they're going to go and what they're going to do and what they're going to vote on, and how they're going to talk about issues. It's, am I going to get enough votes? Am I going to cobble together an effective enough coalition to win? You still got to hold them accountable to what they promise based on what coalition they think they need to gather in order to win in the first place. Sure, but that's how you move folks. There's a strategy to this. Again, folks are always saying, how a third party is going to win. That's how third parties can affect change. Libertarians think about this. Greens think about this too. If things like the Ford Party ever really get off the ground, or the Unite Party, if they ever do that, like if they ever got serious about this, they would have to know that like that's part of a strategy too. Okay, if you can't win, how do we get folks to co-opt our issues? How do we get people to start talking about the things that we want to talk about? How do we move the Overton window to say, hey, we need to talk about Second Amendment rights. Hey, we need to talk about how regulations are killing businesses in New York State. We need to talk about how we need to have effective power sources in New York State. We need to talk about how we need to lower taxes so businesses can thrive. Like all those things, or maybe just a couple of those things in any particular election. Like you want to make movement on those, start talking about loudly, start building your coalition, and then start threatening to not vote for the mainstream candidates unless they start talking about your issues. Takes work. I tried to do it. Ran for Congress a couple of years ago. Tried to do a bit of that. Focused on a handful of issues like education, taxes, things like that. Made some conversation about it. Learned some lessons. Some things worked well. Some things didn't. You never know, right? Like you got to keep hammering away at it. And that's the point, is to be able to do that. You're be able to do that sometimes in the primaries too, but it doesn't always work out that way. But there is an opportunity, even in this election, even when things look bleak, even when things could be going better in terms of the policy direction I'd like to see New York State going. There's still hope. There's still just a tiny bit of sliver that people will do the right thing, and it's going to be convincing. It's going to be building coalitions. It's going to be getting people to talk about your issues. They're not going to do anything unforced. You got to organize to make it happen. All right, thanks again for joining us here on A Free Solution. When we come back, we'll move on to a new topic. We'll talk about maybe some foreign policy stuff. Thanks again for joining us. Give us a call if you want to participate. 585-346-3000. That's 585-346-3000. We'll be back in just a few minutes. Talk to you soon. I know there's no sound right now, guys. Sorry, I realized I still had it mute. I'm gonna try to figure out what's going on after the show. So right now you're just gonna get my laptop mic, not the show feed. Appreciate y'all sticking with me. And great, go ahead and call in, man. Call in. All right, coming back in just a minute, folks. Appreciate everyone listening today. Keep the comments. Call in 553463000. So happy to stick on these topics. We're all talking about some foreign policy stuff. Open to either one today. All right, we're back. Welcome back to A Free Solution. I'm Kevin Wilson, your host for today. Thank you so much for joining us here on this wonderful Wednesday afternoon. We're live here on WYSL until 2 p.m. Give us a call if you want to participate in the show, 585-346-3000. That's 585-346-3000. Or leave your comments online. I know a few folks are commenting on YouTube, commenting on Facebook. All you folks here today, thank you so much for being here. And it sounds like we have someone from Hawaii on the line. Fina from Hawaii. Fina, what's on your mind? What's their free solution? Yes. Oh, heck yeah. Yeah, no, tell me your thoughts on that. Yeah, we are talking about Jones Act in the first segment. Go ahead. Oh, Rochester, New York. Now, see, that's the fun part of doing the online show, right? We get folks from all over the place. So I'm so glad you called in, Fina. What's on your mind about the Jones Act? Amen. Yeah, no, it's great. So, like, how does it? Go ahead. Hmm. They can't go from American port to American port. Yeah. Right on. Yeah, we get that here in New York. Yeah. Yeah, it's wild to me that, like, the incumbents wouldn't be against the Jones Act there because of, like, the direct impact on it, like, folks from California being in favor of the Jones Act, like, yeah, I kinda get that, right? Like, at least, like, it makes some economic sense even if it isn't in the interest of the greater good, right? Or, but like folks from Hawaii, or folks who are trying to say like we want to help the people of Puerto Rico too, which is a a emergency situation they're facing right now. Like why wouldn't you try to fight to eliminate this act? Why aren't there more people who realize this and realize the amount of harm that it causes? So you get the one big pallet of of cornflakes. All right, yeah. No, it shouldn't be that way. You should be able to, again, if you had a lot more options and like where you could get stuff shipped from and what crews, were on those ships and what flags were on those ships. All right. Like, so you have more options. You can have better just in time, logistics methods. You could get to a point where you have stores that are well stocked and probably still expensive, but closer to like what you'd see on, the lower 48. Ah, yeah. Hmm. Now, is he going to do anything about it? That's the different question. Yeah. All right, for those of you listening, that was interesting. Hey, folks listening online, I know the sound's still messed up, and you probably could not hear Fina. It's wonderful. I'm going to release this as a podcast, though. I'll post the link on the Free Solution page, the Kevin Wilson page, wherever you are. And, yeah, you can listen to a full episode there. Oh, you know what? My producer is telling me where to go. WISL1040.com/Podbean or podcast 1040. Oh, WISL.Podbean. All right, there you go. I I have. So I just shared the link. Yeah, it's pretty neat. Mm-hmm. Welcome back to A Free Solution. I'm Kevin Wilson, your host for today. Thanks again for joining us here on this beautiful Wednesday afternoon. Appreciate the caller from the last segment. Good morning to you, Fina. Appreciate you calling in, Libertarian U.S. Senate candidate, talking about the Jones Act. But I was going to switch topics a little bit. I was going to talk about some foreign policy stuff. We'll see how far into it I get, because there's a whole bunch of things going on right now where, and anytime world events are happening, China, Russia, Iran, wherever, right, there's always this pressure, like, should the U.S. get involved? Should the U.S. intervene? And specifically, I want to talk about the situation in Iran right now. It's like there's a woman who is killed. Like they have pretty harsh theocratic laws, right? Like there's a woman who is arrested for wearing her headscarf a little bit too loosely, and she was killed in police custody, right? And it's an awful situation, and that has kind of spun into a bunch of these massive protests, right? And it's again, it's an awful situation where we're familiar with something like that happening here, but this is specific to someone not wearing a headscarf properly, right? Like this is it's one of the, like I always say this, right? Like don't whenever you create a law, any law, and not you specifically, but whenever the government creates any law, whenever you propose any law, doesn't matter how mundane it may or may not be, that law could be enforced with violence, right? So we talked about this, like the Eric Garner thing, selling loose cigarettes. We've talked about this with masking, even. We've talked about this with any sort of thing, right? It doesn't matter how mundane the law. If someone doesn't comply with it, or there's a police officer who's empowered to enforce that law in an aggressive way, it could result in someone getting hurt, someone thrown in a cage, or someone even killed. And so that's what happened in this situation. They decided that it was worth it to use violence against otherwise peaceful people, peaceful women specifically, who weren't wearing their headscarves properly. Right, so that's what happened here. Right? And they did their thing, and now people are mad about it. And part of me is like, hey, good. This is it's good to see people standing up against the government using violence against otherwise peaceful people to enforce this particular thing, right? And again, this is not someone who's hurting someone or taking someone's stuff. This is someone who's just wearing a headscarf improperly. Now, I'd say the same thing about any other type of morality things. Like I say the same thing about marijuana laws, for instance. I'm glad it's getting legalized in New York State, but any other drug laws too. Like it's not a good thing for you to use drugs necessarily, but do we want the government to use violence against peaceful people in those situations who are just consuming drugs? No, that's not what we want to do. That's not the best course of action. That's not going to help anyone. It's expensive. It's going to harm folks. It creates black markets. There's all these negative externalities that exist from having a situation in a set of rules, a set of laws that stray from liberty. Right? It's not just as simple as we're going to stop the bad thing and then great, done. We're done with it. No, that's not. There's all these other things that happen with it, and that law, even if your intent is to help people with sin or with a vice or whatever, it can have these negative consequences. So now getting to the foreign policy aspect of it too, right? Because again, the United States folks want the U.S. to intervene in these situations, to be more aggressive. Like, hey, we're the good guys, right? And I know folks have called it and tell it. Often, sometimes, yeah, sometimes the U.S. is the good guys. Sometimes, even when there are good intentions, things can go wrong. Things can go wildly wrong in foreign intervention situations. And this is one of the situations where if the U.S. were to get involved in any way, it would probably undermine the struggle for liberty in that area. Because now, okay, this is what a lot of autocratic regimes try to do anyway, right? Like Venezuela did this, Russia does this, China does this, Iran does this. Every time there's a mass protest against those governments, something that scares them enough to like actually threaten their power in some way, they say, oh, they're just foreign agents who are coming in and causing trouble, and it's just a U.S. intervention, it's the CIA getting involved. So like weirdly, like the tankies and the leftists who are apologists for like the ugliest portions of the Chinese government, and weirdly like Ron Paul Institute folks too. I don't get what their deal is with that stuff, but like you got this like assumption that like the only way these people would be fighting for liberty is if like the U.S. were getting involved. The U.S. probably isn't involved in any significant way in any of those situations. Again, Venezuela, China with like the Hong Kong situation, with people protesting in Russia right now because they don't want to be conscripted. They're like, oh, they're blaming NATO Western interventionism. No, man, people just don't want to go into the meat grinder for an elective war. No, they don't want to do that. Same thing with the Iranian situations. If we did actually get involved, if the United States government did get involved in some way, and there was proof of that, there's actual evidence of that, not just regime propaganda, it would undermine their ability in this country to be able to fight effectively for liberty, because it taints the movement. It makes it seem illegitimate. It makes it no longer seem grassroots. Where there is a real situation where people are mad and they deserve to be mad. They deserve to be mad that their government is using violence against them unjustly. They deserve to be mad that they have restrictions on what they're able to do and see and how they're able to communicate across the internet. Those are all objectively bad things. And if any of that happened here in the U.S., we would understandably want to fight against that. We do, in fact, as libertarians and small government conservatives, try to do what we can to fight against that wherever we can. So I have some empathy for these folks. Again, that I'm gonna hope for the best for them for afar, because I want to see everyone be able to enjoy the fruits of liberty, because there's so many places where they don't get to enjoy the level of freedom. I have plenty of criticism for New York State, the United States government, all this stuff, and I'll say this over and over again because I said this in the immigration discussion. I'll say we still are pretty darn cool. America is a great country that is full of problems, but it's pretty great. It's not Iran. It's not Russia. It's not China. It's not these other places where there are struggles for even the basic, most fundamental aspects of personal liberty that we ought to have as inalienable fundamental rights. Free speech, self-defense, the right to be secure in our papers and person in our households, all these things that like are kind of easy to take for granted, they don't have. So when I see them fighting for this stuff, I'm like, great, that's awesome. But the U.S. shouldn't get involved. Again, and so somebody might say, well, Kevin, shouldn't, if we want to advance liberty, if we want to do these things, should we get involved? Well, not the state. U.S. government should get involved. It's going to be a mess. It always ends up being a mess. Often it undermines their legitimacy, and we end up parting with it. Again, we saw this with our intervention in Iraq. We saw this with our intervention with ISIS. We saw this in Afghanistan too. Every time we get involved in these situations, sometimes you back the wrong person to empower, and it ends up making the situation worse. or causing a civil war or destabilizing an entire region like our invasion of Iraq did. Maybe you heard an argument made. I haven't looked into this much stuff, but the Iranian revolutions that were starting to happen in 2002, there's big uprisings then too. They ended in part because of fear about the U.S. invading in the region when the U.S. invaded Iraq. So maybe they would have had significant reforms and been a free country that we could have had an actual diplomatic relationship with 20 years ago, if not for the U.S. getting involved. So I want to help. I want to see them succeed. I want to have good things happen for people fighting for liberty. But the American government getting involved complicates things. We see that in Ukraine too. Spending billions and billions of dollars. There's a risk, not just for undermining some of the legitimacy of their fight, but also for escalating a conflict in a way that could cause some serious danger to not merely saying it's a danger to U.S. security really does not sell the situation of how serious the threat of nuclear war is. It is a serious thing. Now, again, I cheer for the Ukrainians. I want them to succeed in the same way, but we're playing a very dangerous game right now. And I imagine that's something like that. We might end up talking about that on the Thursday show too. Again, folks, if you don't know, folks listening on the radio, Tim O'Connor and I usually do a Thursday evening show that's just a little bit more freewheeling, but we might get into some of the foreign policy stuff on that show too, and the dangers of U.S. intervention, not destabilization, causing civil wars, causing potentially nuclear conflict, and where do we decide to intervene in these situations where the danger of not acting is greater than the danger of acting, right? Again, does the situation in Europe get worse if the United States does nothing, if the Europeans do nothing, if we don't threaten retaliation in response to a Russian nuclear threat, or God forbid, an actual Russian nuclear strike? What happens if we don't intervene in that situation? Does the United States government, given the position that's in and the power that it has, have an obligation to get involved? Do we only have an obligation to get involved because of our previous interventions? Maybe. All interesting stuff to think about, all terrifying stuff to think about, but as a libertarian, both for moral reasons, for economic reasons, for legitimacy reasons, the United States shouldn't get involved in most of these situations. But particularly in the Iranian situation, I think there's an opportunity for a real movement to evolve there. And that's what I hope to see. Freedom for everyone. Thanks again for joining us here on A Free Solution. I will be back next week. Have a wonderful week, folks. Take care. No worries. I knew it was coming up soon. Bye, folks.